Welcome to the Carnivore Cast, the podcast focused on the carnivore diet and lifestyle, with practical advice from successful carnivores, citizen scientists, and top researchers. I'm your host, Scott Meslinski, and I'm here to speak with experts and experienced carnivores to get answers to your biggest and meatiest questions while helping you live your best life as a carnivore. If you enjoy the show, please consider supporting the Carnivore Cast on Patreon. By becoming a patron, you'll help us reach more people and continue to create content on carnivore. There are also exclusive perks available, such as private Q&As, consultations with me, and more. Become a supporter at patreon.com/carnivorecast. Check the episode description for the link. Thank you, and I'll see you there. Glenn Elzinga is a former forest ecologist turned rancher. Glenn and his wife Caryl run Alderspring Ranch, a small artisanal family ranch that has passionately produced award-winning grass-fed organic beef for over 20 years in the Idaho mountains. Alderspring Cowboys live with the cattle during the summer months, rotationally grazing them over 46,000 acres of certified organic wild permit rangeland, restoring health to ecologically sensitive areas. Grazing these specific wild grasses creates supremely nutrient-dense beef. Alderspring has also built a successful online business shipping organic grass-fed beef direct to consumers for the last 15 years. Alderspring is climate positive and carbon negative. Welcome to the show, Glenn.
Oh, it's great to be here, Scott. It's wonderful.
Yeah.
So thanks so much for having me.
Of course. Super excited to be speaking with you today. And why don't we start with kind of the origins of Alderspring? Tell me the story of how the ranch began and what kind of where it is today.
Okay. So there's kind of two sides of this story. So this place that we're on right now was homesteaded in, I think, 1885. But it hasn't been my family on it. We've just been ranching for 27 years, and we actually moved onto this specific ranch going on 16 years ago. So we bought it from a practitioner that was fairly conventional, but they weren't using chemicals or anything like that. So it was easy to transition that into an organic outfit. We had already been certified organic on our previous ranch in the adjacent valley, in the Lemhi Valley. We're in the mountains of central Idaho, and I know for most people, Idaho is the antithesis of a carnivore because, everybody associates Idaho with famous potatoes. In fact,
right.
It even says that on the license plate, Scott, which is just this anathema to me, because actually a very small part of the state is potato growing ground. And the reason why there's very dense soil, because most of Idaho has been subjected to can you still hear me, Scott?
Yep.
Okay. Most of Idaho has been subjected to extensive volcanism. And so there's this very recent geologically volcanic history. And most of Idaho is extremely mountainous. Just out my window here, I'm looking at quite a few snow-covered peaks that reach up to 11 or 12,000 feet. We live in a high-altitude valley, 5,000 feet, surrounded by 10 and 11,000 foot peaks. So there's hardly any potatoes grown in this valley. In fact, instead, there's probably about 12,000 head of Angus beef cattle in this valley. So like you said in the intro, which was a great intro, by the way, I started out as a forest ecologist and married my wife, who is a PhD plant ecologist / botanist. And we both had professional level career jobs in the central Idaho mountains. I was working in the timber, and she was working with specifically rare plants all through central Idaho here, of which there are many that occur nowhere else in the world. And so we had these, kind of land resource jobs, very interested in conservation, very interested in hacking ways to figure out how to kind of restore kind of a restoration ecology mindset. And so what was ironic was that we're working on these public lands, of which there's tons of public land country that basically you own, Scott, as a U.S. citizen and taxpayer. In our county alone of Custer County, it's about the size of Connecticut. And there's about 5,000 people, and 97% of the land in Custer County, the size of Connecticut, is public land.
Wow.
Just 3% is private land. So that gives you an idea of what the scope of wilderness is. And this land is essentially untrammeled. There's no buildings on it. There's some logging roads and there's some hiking trails, but it's essential wilderness, and it all vaunts up to, this high altitude alpine country. And so that's the country we were working in. And there was these cows, range cattle that are given free range to graze over these areas that are permitted to specific allotments, they're called. And we were seeing oftentimes cows in these, wild, pristine landscapes, kind of behaving badly in that, by the end of the summer, they just graze in riparian areas, which are along creeks. And, like for instance, on our grazing allotment, in the Hat Creek grazing allotment that you mentioned in the intro, 46,000 acres, which we had no idea we would own one of those, but we do now. So on 46,000 acres, there's 55 miles of perennial creeks that all have trout in them running through this canyon. And so we were seeing all these cows that belonged to various ranchers around. And these cows toward the end of the summer would end up in these creek bottoms and start kind of degrading them. They'd cause the banks to cave in. They would just stay there. And there was nobody there getting them out. And as a result, there's all this fish habitat that's kind of getting wasted. There's erosion situations, there's sedimentation, there's cobble embeddedness, which is where you'll have microfragments of soil like clay soils embed around cobbles in creek bottoms that would deoxygenate fish eggs and actually suffocate fish eggs. And it was all because of cows, Scott. And so it was like when we thought about buying a ranch, my friends that I was working with in the agencies as a forester said, what are you even thinking? I mean, how is this even possible that you'd consider becoming a rancher? And this was in 1991 and 1992. And it was because, Scott, I just love animals, and I love livestock, and I actually have a 900-year lineage in my family, 900 years literally, going back in the Netherlands. My mom and dad were both immigrants, and they were immigrant dairy farmers. And, for generations and generations, probably about 900 years, their families had been dairy farmers. So I guess it was flowing through my blood, and so I didn't want to squeeze those cows anymore for milk. I just wanted to raise them for beef, because that whole business of waking up 2 or 3 in the morning and milking a cow and doing it again in the afternoon, that didn't seem like Scott, it just doesn't seem like quality lifestyle to me.
It's tough.
So it seemed more like bondage, So I thought, hey, what if we raise beef cattle? And my wife was from a corn and soybean farm, ironically, in Indiana, and she had a real love for agriculture. She and I have both worked in and around agriculture all of our lives. And we started to have a family, and we thought, what better way to raise a family than on a small ranch? So we bought a small place in the adjacent valley, 145 acres, 7 cows, a tractor, and a hay baler. And that's how we started. And we just had a little bit of cash in our bank account. And so we started working on the ranch and growing that cow herd. We already, from our ecological bent, had seen the problems associated with chemical distribution, both in animals and on landscapes and on us, because we both had come home working with chemicals with severe headaches, chemical burns, all these things from conventional agriculture. And we kind of wanted nothing to do with all that. So as we built our herd, we said, hey, let's cut out the middleman. Let's try to find people who are interested in a beef that was actually a crazy new paradigm at that time, which is insane. We'd go to this farmer's market in 1994 in Boise, Idaho, and sell our products, and we called it Alderspring Ranch grass-fed beef, and it was this crazy thing for people to process back in the 90s. Now we talk about grass-fed beef, and it's fairly ubiquitous. People are like, "Oh, it's just fed grass, not really fed grain." People have that kind of loose definition in their head.
Yeah.
Back then, Scott, people would say, "Wait. Don't all cattle eat grass?" I mean, they treated us like we were crazy, And I said, well, hold on here a second. You're right. You're absolutely right. All cattle pretty much eat grass. But in the later part of their life, most of them are put on highly concentrated feedstuffs that provide highly concentrated energy to an individual animal. And so Caryl and I, because we're ecologically bent, we just felt like, if you go back in our ancestral genome, Scott, and think about, take me, for instance. Okay. I'm a Frisian, which is it's a northern coastal province of the Netherlands. I'm full blood. And, if I go back into the history, into prehistory, into like even, post development, like around, say 100, 200 AD, or whatever. My ancestors were not farmers. They domesticated livestock later and began to milk cows later. So you say, what did they eat? And so I can come up with several things. My wife is a botanist, and she's dabbled around in Paleo Botany, which is the study of basically, ancient botanicals, and associated that with ethnobotany, which is the stuff that people, ate and, developed as foodstuffs or developed as plants that were complementary to their lifestyle. So if you go and dig, you find out, well, my ancestors, they ate protein off the seacoast. They probably ate a little bit of seaweed and stuff like that, and maybe berries. This is a northern European country. There is not a lot growing there. It's not like there's barley waving in the wind out there or something like that. All right. So, and they were probably eating aurochs, which were the native kind of wild cattle that lived in Europe in that day and age. And aurochs is actually from which pretty much all modern cattle descended, at least the English breeds. We also have African type cattle, which is Bos indicus type cattle, which have now kind of interbred with a lot of American cattle by choice for growth characteristics and stuff. But most of our cattle were based on this aurochs kind of bloodline. And that was kind of what my ancestral genome ate. So basically, our way of thinking was, well, if humans kind of ate these, primal foods, then why would we want to stray from that, what our genome had developed on?
Right.
And why wouldn't we want to eat something that our body essentially had evolved, had been designed, had adapted to for millennia? All right. Because here's the deal. I think so many of us in Western culture are critically ill, Scott, and it's because we're eating frankenfood. We're eating stuff that's been morphed away from what our genome had developed on. Okay. So that was kind of an underlying philosophy of what Caryl and I believed. We're like, hey, grass fed, basically eating wild grasses is basically better for the animals. It's better for the planet. It's better for the land. And it's better for people as well, because this was, I'm using kind of a generic quote here, but it was the natural order of things. It really literally was the natural order of things. And it's how our genome developed, especially in a Northern European sense, maybe an African sense. A lot of those people were, they were beef eaters or they were wildebeest eaters. They ate wild cattle. And so we were like, why not grow a beef that's kind of reminiscent of those wild cattle? And to start with, it was just very easy to say, let's have them eat wild forage. So that's how we started. So we started raising grass-fed beef back in 1993, 94 in direct marketing to people, first at farmers markets. Then we built it to an online presence. And we've been doing this now for this is year 28 that we've been doing it. And now we have an online business. We've certified organic. We did that. I think the first year was 03 that we certified organic. We were kind of literally practicing with organic practices before that. So it was an easy transition for us. And we became certified organic. Now we get inspected every year by a third-party certifier that proves that indeed, we don't use any synthetic chemicals in our production protocol. And so now, and actually we're finishing from that 7 head. We actually have some genetics that are connected loosely to that yet from that 7 initial cows. And now we raise and finish between 400 and 500 beeves a year. And like right now, running around on Alderspring Ranch, there's there's around 650 head scattered all over the place. And
wow.
We'll go and talk about what that looks like. And this is still a small ranch, mind you, Scott.
Small. It's all relative.
It's all relative. Exactly. I mean, our ranch is over 70 square miles in size. And it's all us. We're the only people who run on that with our cattle. So with the expansion of the ranch, where we picked up this new ranch in the Passamaquoddy Valley in central Idaho, we picked this up in 2005. We were able to acquire this BLM and U.S. Forest Service grazing lease, which is now part of the ranch, that 46,000 acres. So up there, we've been able to realize a brand new kind of aspect of wild food for us, because the wild food has always been critical for us, because we realized that there was a whole bunch of things that animals, when given a choice, unlike a feedlot situation where the human chooses their food, if we can provide unlimited choice to these animals for them to be discretionary about what to eat, then they're going to be able to maximize their wellness. And we've seen this in our cattle. Our vet bill has dropped to almost zero. I mean, it's virtually zero. So out of, every year, our sickness rate is less than 2%, and our mortality rate is less than 0.5% for every year that we're in production. So those are numbers that very, very few other people in the business. I've never even heard of anybody with those kind of numbers. So this is not using antibiotics. This is not using hormones. This is not using synthetic wormers of any kind. This is all animals making the choice on their own to eat the medicine that they need based on the wild plant populations that they encounter. So there's 2,250 wild plants that grow on that grazing range. And of those, my wife's the botanist, and she hacks all this information. Scott, I don't know where she knows most of these plants there. And I don't. I mean, I know probably about 100 of them. She knows thousands. Okay. You can walk with her up there, Scott. And someday you need to come out. You just need to get your butt out here.
Oh, I'd love
to. I'd throw you on a horse and show you this country. Because, you'll just be riding above, watching these cattle eat all this diversity. And Scott, I only know about half the plants they're eating. In a given day, I'll observe them eating 100 different species. And there's another 100 more given the elevation zone or the topographic zone or soil types that they're on. There's 100 more that I don't know that they're grazing. And so I could pick up these tiny little esoteric, like the other day, for instance, we're coming out of cow camp with the cattle. The wind is howling. It's snowing. It's snowing today, by the way, quite hard up there. And we have crazy weather because it's all very high mountain country, but what it makes is very, very nutrient dense grass with the cold nights and warmer days. And we're getting a lot of moisture in the form of snow right now. So it's really quite beautiful. So anyway, there's all these tons of little wildflowers coming up right now. And I'm watching a cow, and she's got her head down grazing across this wild landscape, and they're just picking up a lot of these things. And all of a sudden I see her and about 3 other steers in this little cluster just dive onto this bed of this blue-green moss that I have no idea what the name is, under this bunch of sagebrush. And I'm like, holy cow, I've never seen him graze that moss before. So, but what's happening, Scott, is I think that there's something inside them, like biophysiologically, that's connecting to their mind that says, go eat that, because that's the nutrition you need today. That's got a phytochemical, that's got a micronutrient that you need today for your wellness. And I think that is a story of why our cattle do so well. And that was a mouthful.
This episode is brought to you by Optimal Carnivore. Optimal Carnivore was created by carnivores for carnivores. They've recently released a new product, a grass-fed bone marrow. It is the whole bone extract, which includes the bone marrow, the cartilage, and collagen peptides. Our ancestors would have eaten the whole animal, including bones, and especially the marrow. All the nutrients and substances that your body needs to build, repair, and maintain your bones, teeth, and connective tissue can come from the bone marrow. It's a complex that contains the same components as home-cooked bone broth, but making bone broth can be a hassle. You have to source high-quality bones, boil them for days, and this is a simple, convenient alternative that's gently freeze-dried so it preserves all the nutrients completely intact. It's perfect for people who are traveling or don't have time to make bone broth themselves. Visit www.amazon.com/optimalcarnivore and use the code carnivore10 to receive 10% off your purchase. Super interesting, Glenn, and thank you for sharing all that with us. I think you do an excellent job of encapsulating all the fantastic elements of Alderspring and really the thoughtfulness behind it, which is amazing. And you answered a lot of my questions in that. One thing I wanted to ask about, you have this piece on your website, which I think is a great resource. Folks should check that out. But you talk about inherding, and protecting the animals. So, you talk about all the benefits of them being in this natural habitat where they can find the plants that are the healthiest for them and the best for their development and well-being. Can you talk a little bit about what inherding means and some of the measures you've taken to protect the animals as well?
Oh, you bet. Yeah, I'd love to. That's a great question, Scott. So that actually nails the essence of a lot of what we do in trying to hack. But we're basically, your folks, your listeners, I got to credit them all because they're all hackers. Okay. They have all kind of biohacked their wellness. And that's why they turn to carnivore. And I'm a carnivore as well. So I totally understand where they're coming from because, I was not doing well. I had some severe autoimmune issues. I'm 57 years old and I was just feeling like crap. I was diagnosed with irritable bowel. I was diagnosed with pre-onset Crohn's. And,
Wow.
If you read about Crohn's, you're like, oh my gosh, these guys want to take a piece of my large intestine out, right?
Yeah, my wife was the same.
So, yeah. So anyway, and nothing like, I guess, it just kicks you in the guts, Scott. It just kind of shakes you down to your foundation that there's something so messed up with your lifestyle or eating or maybe just your genome. You can't even put your finger on what's causing this early onset Crohn's. And so when you start hacking it, because you can't go to the medical practitioners, right? There's very few out there. I found on one hand, I found, trained medical practitioners who are not naturopaths. They are MDs that I can actually consult with and talk to about these things. And we'll have a lucid discussion, So anyway, it made me a hacker. And that's what your listeners are. They're all hackers. We're all hackers together. We have a tribe of hackers that we're listening to right now. And, I was doing the same thing at the same time with my cattle. My wife and I, Caryl, we are hackers. We're always trying to figure out how to better the wellness of our cattle. So there was this thing happening that was really adversely affecting the wellness of our cattle. And we're losing as much as 14 head every year. So right now there's 450 head up there, or 410 head up there on that grazing allotment. And like I said, it's wilderness. It's like Alaska up there. There's nothing up there. There's no homes. There's no people. In fact, one time I had this kid from Buffalo, New York working for me, Scott. And, you know, we've been riding horseback like 5 days a week. You know, we roll into the ranch here like 2:00 in the morning, and I kick him out of bed at 6 a.m. and we start all over again. and we go ride up there, and we'd ride up there all day, you know, through the rain and snow and sleet and sun. And we'd be on the saddle. His butt was just getting burned off. I know it was. You know, he just wasn't hardened to it. But he was tough. Dadgum, I got to hand it to him. His name was Tim Grant, and he's just a great guy. He's actually a grass-fed practitioner. He raises excellent beef outside of Fredonia, Western New York right now. He has this farm called Stand Fast Farms. He's doing a great job with it. And I think he got his foundation of toughness to stay in the industry here. But anyway, he and I had been up there for about 6 weeks, Scott, and we're riding horseback every day. And son of a gun, dadgummit, we're up there one day, and we bump into this pickup truck. And there's about 3 pretty girls in it. And they all work for the Forest Service, and they all get out, and we chat with them for a while. And, you know, I watched him, and he's just lighting up, you know, and he's just lighting up. He's having a great time visiting with these gals, and they're looking for noxious weeds up there. And we talk to him about where we've seen a few plants and this and that and the other. And we talk about the country and just hang out for like 20 minutes, you know, and off they go and off we go. We got cattle to go find. And so we trot up the hill on horseback. And, you know, Tim is a changed individual all day. And I can't put my finger on it. And we're riding back at midnight. We load horses up in this remote loading spot where we got our gooseneck parked, and we load them up in the trailer. And we're trundling out of that country on these rough and ramshackle roads that you couldn't sleep if you wanted to on, even though we're both exhausted. And we're just visiting. And I said, Tim, you seem so happy today. I said, what is it? What is it that kind of is turning your crank today? And he said, I saw another human. And so that's really the essence of how wild the country is. You know, I mean, he said, I saw another human, because he hadn't seen one all summer, and other than me. And so it's really wild country. And what the wild aspect is that we have every major predator in North America living up there. We have a lot of bears. We have a lot of mountain lions. And we have many, many wolves. In fact, Idaho Fish and Game just did a wolf survey last fall to find out how many wolves we have in this 3-county area where we graze cattle. And there's 1,425 wolves right now. And a bunch of those are females that are going to have pups this spring. And in that same piece of country, Scott, just for perspective, there's about 140 people. There's 10 times more wolves than there is people in this part of Idaho. So, anyway, the wolf population is significant. Wow. And of course, they happen to like grass-fed organic beef. So that was the thing we were losing cattle to. They were just annihilating us. And so my wife and I had to put our heads together when we came off there. We're licking our wounds with all these dead animals getting eaten up by wolves looking for grass-fed beef. And we're like, we have got to do something different. We have got to change our strategy, because up till then we've been just turning the cattle out, and then we go find them in the fall. And we knew we had to do something dramatically different. So we were at a friend's house, actually Christmas caroling that winter, just before Christmas, and they had a lot of pictures, a lot of paintings, watercolor and acrylics, or actually oil paintings by this old boy named Charles Russell. And C.M. Russell is his name. And he was a painter who painted over 4,000 paintings documenting the life of turn of the century Great Plains, Montana. And so he painted, you know, many, many paintings. And he lived with these cowboys who lived out there on the range with their cattle. And I turned to Caryl after we got out of Roy and Jeannie's house where all these paintings were. And I said, you know what? We need to do that again. And she said, we need to do what? I said, we need to go live with our cattle again. And I got really excited. I said, you know what it is that those guys were living with their cattle to protect them from wolves, from grizzly bears. They were protecting them from getting lost. They were taking them to the best grass. They were taking them to the best place to get water. And I said, instead of just turning our cattle out and set stocking that whole thing, what if we actually managed them and lived with them all the time, protecting them from wolves, from bears, from mountain lions, and we took them to the best grass. We took them to the best grass. And Caryl and I knew what the best grass was. We were both, she had learned all of her plants up there. She knew she was in the middle, in fact, of writing a book about the forage qualities of hundreds of different species of grasses up in central Idaho. We knew what the best grass looked like. And we also knew that if we could provide a diversity, like, when you and I go to a restaurant, Scott, and check out, if we're carnivores, but say, back in the old days, or say we took a little hiatus and checked out a salad bar, the best places to check out a salad bar had a huge diversity. So for me, I still go to the salad bar because there's always meat choices in the salad bar. And I try, here's some bacon, here's some meatballs, here's some chicken, so I'll try all these things. So I'm very happy to see, highly diverse salad bars. So, I think it's the same thing with our cattle. They get happy to have a huge diversity of choices to choose from rather than some human forking hay or coming along with a concentrate wagon with grain in it and just churning off that stuff and saying, here, cows, this is what you should eat. So not only living with cattle, not only could we skin the cat, so to speak, or skin the wolf, so to speak, of protecting our animals from wolves and basically cohabitating with them in a non-lethal relationship. So, a lot of my neighbors are shooting wolves like crazy. I'm not into it. I'm a hunter. I've hunted elk but I've never been a killer for killing's sake ever. I've always hunted for meat. I can't eat wolves. So I'm like, you know what? Let's just coexist. Let's just coexist with the dang wolves. And they'll be out there and we'll be out there. But I know they hate humans because they're so, so, so smart. So ever since we started that, we started living with their cattle and camping with them every night. We put them in a hot wire, an electric fence enclosure every night. And they're trained to go in there every night. And then we get on horseback the next morning and we take them to graze. And we pick the best grass that they could possibly graze at. We pick places for them to drink that are not going to impact fish at all. We pick, either we graze and drink outside of a creek zone with a pipelined water source from a creek or a spring so that we don't damage a creek or a spring, or we find a super, super armored, by rock, creek banks so that we don't put sediment in the creek or manure in the creek or knock down the banks or destroy fish habitat. So as a result, our animals, we haven't lost one to wolves for 6 years. In fact, we have only one animal we've lost over 6 years now of grazing up there.
Wow.
Because we're there with them. We're practicing, what it is, Scott, it's just husbandry. We're there with them, living with them on the land. And it's actually pretty entertaining because you're watching them when you present them that salad bar of this huge diversity. They go and hack it themselves, just like we hacked the carnivore thing. They go and hack it themselves and say, this is what I feel like eating today, so I'm going to eat this. And you'll see them hack all these different facets of their diet, and it's maximizing their wellness because they never get sick. They do super well up there, and they grow and they gain weight. And sure, it takes way longer than putting an animal in a feedlot and concentrate, but I'll tell you what, it's the way they were made. Remember, I talked about all the ancestral stuff and the primal stuff. Animals are made to eat this way, to select their own diversity of forage and to eat all these different forbs and grasses that are wild, provided we give them enough choice. And so this wild range thing that we're doing with these beef is just, there's a rightness to it, Scott, that I can't even convey to you. When you're up there on horseback watching this happen, it just kind of blows you away, because it's like, this is what these animals are meant to do. And it's this bison instinct that's kind of reflexing back through their genome now. And we've kind of risen in them this wild bison, this wild aurochs instinct about how to forage. And they got their heads down all the time, Scott, because they're comfortable, because they're trained that the people on horseback are their protectors. So they don't have their heads up looking around for predators anymore. They are not stressed. I can walk up to one of them and scratch them on the back. They'll move away, but they're comfortable with us being there as their protectors, and they'll eat the entire day until their belly is just packed full and they can't eat anymore. We bring them back to camp. They get a drink and they collapse for the night. And they basically live their bison destiny. You know, bison used to range on our hills. They weren't these huge herds that were in the, middle America, but there were these small herds of, anywhere from 10 to 20 to 200 to 500 to 1,000 head of bison that would roam around this country. Bison don't really have it in their genome to go graze riparian areas down to nothing like domestic cows have been allowed to when they're not operating in a predator instinct anymore. So we train our cows to stay away from these creeks by herding them away from them all the time. And as a result, we're kind of living a kind of a bison facsimile. And that's one thing that kind of courses all the way through our veins as far as rightness too, Scott. It's like, when we venture away from mimicking nature, we create food that's not good for us or the planet or for the animal. Absolutely. You know what I mean? Every time we strayed from nature, Caryl and I have done it all. I've given organophosphate ear tags that are supposed to keep the flies off and all this crap. I go to bed with this incredible headache. I can't sleep at night. And then I watch, fly resistance start happening. At first, all the flies are dying, right? And then fly resistance starts happening. So next time, guess what? I use the organophosphate ear tags again, and the flies are all there. That doesn't work anymore. They got a resistance now, so now we've created a Frankenfly based on our insecticide ear tag use, So, Caryl and I have been through all this commercial crap, and we're sick and tired of it, because every time we found that we ventured away from nature, we realized we had to pay back sometime. Somehow we'd have to pay back. And so we quit all that. We hung it all up. We transitioned to organic starting in 2000 and became certified in 2003. We just said, no more. We're going to try to figure out the way nature intended to raise cattle, the way nature intended to raise grass, the way nature intended to have a living soil. So anyway, in herding, going back to that, that's what we're doing. We're intensively and intentionally, that's why in herding animals across the landscape. It's all very intentional and intense. We're actually strategizing what they're going to eat the next day to maximize their diversity of choice, so that they can maximize their wellness. And then us, Scott, you and I, when we get the ribeye on the plate or the burger on the grill, we know that beef has been maximized in terms of wellness because the animal was given all the possible choices of phytochemical richness that they could gather up from the planet Earth, and it's going to benefit us as well. And that's why it was easy for me to make the carnivore transition, because of in-herding. I knew that when we ate our beef, we were going to feel great. And we do. Yeah. Just feel great. For 57, I just feel great, Scott. I've lost every possible pound and I'm just down to, just a super wiry, pretty fit person who can work all day and live up there on the range on horseback 14 hours a day and wake up the next morning and do it all over again, and there's a lot of people in my age group, you know them, you've seen them. Some of them I'm sure have been in your podcast that have transformed their lives through carnivore. But, there's a ton of us in Western culture in that 50-year-old bracket who are they're living a near-death experience. And it's because of the choices of food they made.
Yeah. That's really fantastic Glenn, and there seem like some very happy cows, and I like how you translate it into the benefits to the consumer as well. So let's shift gears a little bit and talk about your carnivore diet. How did you get started on that? What does it look like for you? How do you practice a carnivore diet? I'd love to dive into that.
Sure. So, it's really actually pretty simple. I'm doing what the cows do. Okay. And, when they're, I try to keep a wide diversity of choice. So we have free range eggs that we raise. We have free range pork that we raise, free range chicken that we raise. And of course, unlimited amount of beef. So, and we raise, my son-in-law and daughter-in-law also have milk cows, and sometimes we get butter from them, but more often than not, I have to buy like a grass-fed butter in the store. So, but anyway, how we got on it. So, my wife and I have both struggled with autoimmune disease, more her than I. I had, of course, the whole IBS thing, pre-onset Crohn's. I was on Zantac for years, trying to mitigate these acid issues, H blockers, all this crap, because I was eating standard American diet. Sure, I loved my meat. I was actually a hunter at that time. I was killing elk, but I was eating a ton of carbs and stuff like that. And it kind of all came to a head when I said to Caryl one day, we're coming back from the Midwest, visiting family over there. I said, you know what? I think I'm dying. I think I'm literally dying because I just could not get rid of the pain in my gut. And my guts just hurt. They were inflamed. There was extra fat on my body, Scott, but more of it than anything. And I'm realizing it now and I know you probably look at people the same way. We all have a different kind of critical eye apprising our fellow man now, and I watch people, in supermarkets and stuff and look at what's in their cart and then I look at their belly.
Yeah, it's sad.
And it's this perverse addiction, that I have that where, I'm scoping out people all the time. And so a lot of people, I look at their cart and it agrees with what their belly's saying. And I totally get it. But I think what's interesting about their belly is that I'm convinced, based on the rest of their phenotype, that a lot of it is just flat inflammation. Sure, there's fat there, there's some obesity going on, but a lot of it is just flat inflammation. I'm just looking at an inflamed, on fire body. And it's because of all the crap we're eating. We're eating grain-fed beef that has, dry distillers grains in it, which actually, it's the main feed stuff in America today is dried distiller grains, DDGs, which is a byproduct of what? Ethanol production that, replacement for fossil fuels, supposedly that's grown out of corn. So we've created a monster with this corn byproduct in DDGs, and there's a ton of cattle fed DDGs. I think I read a statistic that said that I'm trying to remember how many semi-loads it was. It was like around 10,000 semi-loads of DDGs are produced every day by ethanol producing plants in the United States. So all that's got to go into feedlots for cattle feed. So that's a ton of cattle feed, actually a few more pounds than a ton, and it goes into these animals. So, and corn isn't much better, because it's just a simple carb. It's just pure energy, and it likes phytochemicals or it lacks phytochemicals. So you lose a lot of the nutrition on these simple grains that an animal could be acquiring on our own, given a kind of a grass-fed nutritional quest. It provided the grass-fed practitioner has good biodiversity in his pastures. Biodiversity is just huge. I mean, it's natural, right? I mean, it's nature. It's a nature mimic again, where we get into these grass-fed monocultures of pasture. We're not basically raising grass-fed beef the way nature intended. We're raising another frankenfood with simple carbohydrate grasses. So, if for all you folks out there, I'm not saying go buy Alderspring beef. But what I'd like to say to them is go find a local producer and you can walk his pastures with him. And he or she knows the plants and says, we have 30 species out here that our animals can pick from. And, maybe it's plantain. They're going to graze some plantain or yarrow. These are both medicinal plants that are very common in a semi-diverse pasture that are very important for animals to self-medicate to protect them from flies. And actually, we're going to pick up the phytochemicals that they ingest there through the meat as well. So they're going to benefit us too by eating a diverse pasture. So anyway, going back to the whole carnivore thing and the journey there, here I'm raising these grass-fed cattle, Scott, and I'm like looking at them and I'm like, they are healthier than I am. They are healthier than I am. And I kind of went back through my ancient genome, started thinking about what my ancestors ate. And Scott, no doctor's telling me this. It's like just basic common sense. I mean, if an animal's entire genome has history eating foods X, Y, Z, and ABC, then why wouldn't I want to eat X, Y, Z, and ABC in terms of what the phytochemical composition of those foods could have been in terms of primal foods? So that means go eat those foods that are whole foods, that were raised holistically. It doesn't have to be our grass. It could be the neighbor's grass that has a ton of biodiversity in it. It could be, I'm not against vegetarians. I'm not against vegans, but I'm like, go find something that's not based on a dang soybean monoculture. Have you ever been in a soybean field, Scott? This is an anathema because yeah, I got vegan friends who are like, well, I eat soy this, soy that. So, I'm like, dude, you're not only killing yourself, you're killing the planet. I used to work on a soybean farm. It is a 100% biological desert, Scott. There is nothing else growing there except soybeans because they've sprayed the crap out of it. And you might see a deer track running across it that got from point A to point B across the field, but there's nothing there for the deer to eat. You dig your hand in the ground. There's nothing but dirt. There's no soil. There's no worms. There's no life underground. There's no rodents, living in that. It is a biological desert. And I can't figure it out. I can't figure out how a vegan says, I eat soy milk, I eat soy tofu, I eat all these things, and that's good for me. How they can possibly construe that they're getting the phytochemical richness and the vitamins and minerals they need out of this biological desert that's basically now almost a hydroponic medium. They've planted these soybeans on these sterile soils that are basically like a hydroponic medium, and are injecting them with, all these minerals and chemicals that they need to basically grow the stupid soybean, and that's it. They're not taking care of the soils. They're not keeping them from blowing away. They're not keeping them from eroding into the Gulf of Mexico. There's no soil health down there. There is no carbon stored in a soybean field. Okay, there's nothing. You compare that to truly pasture-raised foods in a wild pasture diverse setting. There's an incredible, huge amount of biodiversity underneath the landscape of that. In fact, that biodiversity loves holding water and keeping water down in the soil surface and capturing it and preventing it from causing erosion, preventing it from just evaporating into the atmosphere, and making sure that our water cycle is intact. So for every 1% you gain in organic matter through living soils, through living animals and plants underground, you gain 27,000 gallons of water that are associated with that living medium for every acre of ground you do this with. So, the implications are just huge. So anyway, going back full circle to the carnivore thing, when I put all that together and go back to my ancestral foods, I'm like, well, of course, this is such an easy box to check, Scott. I just got to source these foods, and they happen to be, for me, very conveniently accessible. Okay, but that doesn't mean that Scott in Massachusetts can't access them. That doesn't mean that Bill in Texas can't access them. But, if you don't have your health, you have nothing. So, we buy these stupid widescreen TVs and cars and, all these crazy things we buy. But for some reason, food is the last item on the total poll, and finding phytochemically rich, biodiversity enhancing food has fallen out the window for most of us. And it's like, why? This is the one thing that we want to invest in. And that was the tipping point for me. It's like, wait, I got grandkids. I got kids. I want to keep working. I love what I do, Scott. I love what I do. And I want to do it well. I love to backcountry ski. My girls all are avid backcountry skiers. We just bombed down these wild, Idaho mountains in the backcountry, seeking out, deep powder stashes that are 3 to 6 feet deep. And we search those out all winter and try to stay out of avalanches way. And, we're just totally into it. It's like our winter passion when we're not on horseback. And I want to keep doing that stuff, Scott. And in order for me to do it, I need to fuel it in a way that I'm not going to be feeling sick all the time. Yeah. So it was like a no-brainer. I'm going to make a choice for my health, for my family, for the planet, for my animals, for the soils. And it's really nice because you can kind of holistically think about all these things because they're all connected with one small choice, and it's a dietary choice. So that's how I got into the carnivore thing. I was like, well, I can't even figure out why I'd want to go back because, one, I'm feeling great. Two, I'm checking all these boxes. Finally, for the first time in my life, I'm checking all these boxes because, I'm checking sustainability boxes. I'm checking animal wellness boxes. I'm checking, climate change boxes. For the first time, we've done our numbers and we find out that we're actually climate positive and carbon negative. We're putting more carbon in the ground than we're emitting on our ranch, and I mean, so when you become connected with this thing through carnivore, it connects you at a new level that you've never really, ascertained before. And it all becomes very real to you. It all becomes very real because it's a holistic thought. It was a holistic box to check. It wasn't like, oh, I'm just going to do this because I got blood sugar issues. No. You're going to do this because of you. There are so many interconnected issues that you're going to be able to solve with this one decision to go eat like your ancestors did.
Yeah. And I think that's so cool how you can integrate all these elements together. I'm really jealous, Glenn. It sounds like you're living the life and the dream of a lot of the people listening.
But it's reachable for you, for all of us on this cast right now, on the Carnivore cast. It's reachable for all of us. And it's not like, oh, I'm going to order from Alderspring right now. No. I want you guys to find the people that are around you. We all, even in urban areas, there's access, man. There's access where you can build relationship with people who are on the land. They'd like nothing better than to meet you and hang out with you and meet them on the land and let them, you're both going to learn. Yeah. You, Scott, are going to learn. They're going to learn, and you're going to get into that holistic interconnectedness that goes way beyond just Scott feeling better and be able to, lift more iron or, run far and better distances more efficiently than those people who are eating carbs, it's, the implications are just magnificent with this carnivore thing because I think it's very slow. It's a drip, but slowly we can transform so many people's lives and in the life of this planet. I'm looking at this, I got this little deal a friend of mine signed. His name is Dan Rasmussen. He's a rancher. He was a very, very, typical rancher in South Dakota. He runs on 36,000 acres of ground out there. He's got 600 mama cows. He's about 10 years older than I am. He's become this great, great friend. I pick up some cattle from him because he's kind of developed an elite Angus genetic that actually fits very well with the foraging paradigm that I kind of been talking to you about. But tell you what, Dan and I were talking about carnivore for a while. And son of a gun, Scott, he calls me about 6 months ago. He says, well, that's it then. I said, what do you mean that's it then? He said, I just became carnivore. And nice. I'm like, No, it is nice. And for the first time in his life, this dude is feeling good. I mean, he's 65 years old, and he's finally feeling good, Scott, and it just kind of blows me away. It's like, dude, if you just hang up the cookies and start eating what your ancestors ate, you could feel good too,
Yeah. It's remarkable. And we had the chance, my wife and I, we were gifted a quarter cow, from a local farm here in Massachusetts, last fall for our wedding. And it was just an awesome experience to go out there, meet the farmer, talk to him about the history of his farm, how he cares about the cattle. It really made us feel way more connected, and we really enjoyed that beef so much as we ate it over the coming months. So I'd really encourage people. And there's a great website called eatwild.com where you can look up.
Yep.
It's a directory of local farmers, where you can source beef or other products, by state. It has a state directory.
Exactly. Yeah, we're on Eat Wild as well. It's been a great resource. Joe Robinson has put that together, and she's done an excellent job of kind of directing people to where to find that wild food.
Well, Glenn, I feel like we could talk for ages, and we're just scratching the surface. We'll have to do a part 2 sometime in the near future. But I'd love to just ask where folks can find out more about Alderspring and you, and maybe what you're looking forward to over the next year or so, with regards to Alderspring, some things you're looking forward to or changes you're looking to make.
That's a really good point. The changes we'd like to make. First of all, I'm thinking about that. So, the best way to kind of track what we're doing is just go to Instagram. I'm sure a lot of your followers are on Instagram. Alderspring_ranch. Alderspring_ranch is our Instagram handle. And you can also find us on Facebook, Alderspring Ranch. And then we have a website called alderspring.com. And that'll take you into the why and how of what we do. And if nothing else, Scott, there's a lot of cool pictures and videos on there that kind of show what life is like on the range. And I think a lot of people just recreationally watch those because, I got people say, they'll write me or call me and say, Glenn, I was sitting on the subway in Manhattan heading to work, in Midtown, and I just watched you on horseback up on the range. And he said, it was exactly what I need to see. I think a lot of people just watch it for the juxtaposition, of realities. And, but we're all connected, and the cool thing about, Instagram and even our customer base, we don't even call them customers anymore. We call them all partners. When I address them, it's partners. I never even use the word customer anymore. Because you know what? We are joined at the hip. We have about, I don't know, it's probably 5,000 people who subscribe to our newsletter, via alderspring.com. And we send a newsletter out every week. And it usually has, like a 2,000 or 3,000 word essay there that one of us has written about, what life looks like out here, or what we've seen up there as far as wildlife. Sometimes we'll meet a bear or something like that, and we'll talk about what the bear was doing or whatever, so it's just kind of life out on the range essays. So, and I get so many people that comment back on those things that a lot of them buy our beef, and I just feel so joined with them in that relationship, Scott. I mean, it's, I haven't met them, but we're on first name basis with so many people,
Yeah.
I got Mike in New Jersey, he's become a great friend. I've never met this guy, and he's just one of many, 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 many examples, in many states. There's Chris up in Bangor, Maine. He and I have become great friends. Chris is elderly and he has some health issues, and we walk together through them, and we're able to talk about them online. And, I just have grown to love and respect so many of these people because, they give us input. We talk about, what we can do to change our lives together in terms of our dietary paths or whatnot. Like I got this gal in New Mexico, Kathy. She was dying for quite a few years, and she got on our stuff, And, it kind of turned her completely around. She became 100% carnivore and just ate our stuff. And it turned her from what it turned out to be was uranium poisoning, and basically saved her life. And, so I build all these relationships with these people, Scott, and I'm just humbled and blown away by those partners. And, so those are the places you can kind of connect with us. Alderspring.com, Alderspring_ranch on Instagram. Those are great starting points. And I'd love to just meet all of you. And ultimately, I'm hoping I can meet you here on the ranch. We're going to start having ranch days where people can come out. And I'm convinced a lot of these people just fly out because that's how close we are. We're family now. And so, about what we're going to do in the future. So this COVID thing, it's just a crazy wake up call for us.
Yeah.
We kind of had to reinvent the wheel to handle COVID because our demand just pegged. It just pegged. And you'll see if you checked out the web store now, most stuff is sold out. You go, wow, with, the amount of cattle we raise. But, that's all we don't trade cattle. We don't bring foreign cattle in and cut their heads off and then say, oh, this is Alderspring. No, this is all stuff that we handcrafted. We do buy calves from partner producers that are certified organic, 100% grass fed, got the right genetics, that basically have the same husbandry standards that we do. And then we'll finish them here for another 1.5 to 2 years on our grass. And that way, I can guarantee the flavor consistency, the textural consistency. I can guarantee the phytochemical richness. I can guarantee the health benefits. So everything we purvey on that site is raised and finished by us. It's got our fat on it. And the fat is interesting, Scott, because, we used to sell the fatty ground beef for less than the lean ground beef.
Yeah.
And we kept running out. So we had to raise the fatty ground beef price to above the lean ground beef price to try to have a price control in there.
That's interesting.
Because people realize that our fat, the fat that our grass-fed cattle have on them is just full of nutrition. It's full of these benefits. To start off with, it's more yellow. So obviously it's got beta carotene in it, that you're not going to get through vegetables, right? Especially if you're a carnivore, you have to get these essentials, and our animals are gathering it for you, and it's showing up in the fat. So we're producing cattle now that are kind of the anathema for the grass-fed beef industry. Our target is to have them grade USDA choice and be fat and be marbled to before we present them on our web store. So we'll be clear about it. If it's a leaner one, we'll tell you. But if it's a ribeye and we say this is a regular ribeye, it's going to be marbled. It's going to have cap fat, and a lot of people will shortchange that with grass fed because they don't want to wait that long. But for me, there's so much nutrition found in that fat that I feel like I owe it to people to present them grass-fed beef with real fat on it that has all this, this plethora of all these micronutrients and stuff in it. So anyway, so for, this COVID thing kind of has, the challenge for us is to continue that relationship part. And make those people feel like they're partners. Because I don't, even with the increase in customer influx, my challenge is to love these people and reach out to them on a very personal level. First through, them trying our beef, and then through contacts and through letting them, know who we are through social media. And ultimately, I hope, we can, have conversations, if they have questions, whether it be online or on the phone or maybe even, face to face. I was at a store in Atlanta, Georgia that we serve a while back, and I was blown away. There's like a lot of people in the store in Atlanta, Georgia, and I had people walk up to me and shake my hand that were some of my online partners. They had come out of the woodwork in Georgia to come visit with me, and it was such a beautiful time, Scott. It's just a beautiful time where we could, we basically talked about, old times like we're family. I even knew about some of their kids. Hey, how's Michelle doing? Is she in college yet? And that stuff just blows me away. I'm just humbled, and they know about my kids, what's going on. And that's really where food should be. If we scaled this up in America, if we scaled it up in our Western culture, Canada, all our Western society, Western Europe, and, built relationship with our farmers and producers. I really do. I'm convinced. I'm 100% convinced that we don't need the juggernaut of big beef production. We don't need those things. What we need to replace it with is relationship.
Yeah.
And that's the biggest challenge for me, is continuance of that relationship.
That's great. I really like that focus on your partners, the consumers as partners. And I'll certainly link to all that media and your website in the show notes, Glenn, and really appreciate you coming on today. Like I said, feel like we'll definitely have to do a part 2 sometime in the future, but I learned a ton today, and I think a lot of folks will as well. So thank you very much for your time. Cool.
Well, Scott, it's been a true pleasure, and I thank you so much. And it's actually, you're a kindred spirit, and your listeners are kindred spirits to me, because we're on this journey together. I'm going to follow you guys, and I'm going to pay attention. If sometimes I'm hauling cattle across Montana or whatever, I'm going to listen to your cast, because, I know, just by looking at I've listened to some of them already, and I'm just like, I could learn so much here about how to better hack this for the wellness of me, for my family, and for my friends. So thanks for doing what you do. I really appreciate the clearinghouse of information that you're providing. And man, I'm proud to know you, Scott. So thanks so much for your time.
Thank you, Glenn. That means a lot. Have a great rest of your day.
You too. Take care now.
If you enjoy the show, please consider supporting the Carnivore Cast on Patreon. By becoming a patron, you'll help us reach more people and continue to create content on carnivore. There are also exclusive perks available, such as private Q&As, consultations with me, and more. Become a supporter at patreon.com/carnivorecast. Check the episode description for the link. Thank you, and I'll see you there. Thank you for listening to this episode of the Carnivore Cast. If you enjoyed this episode, please review on iTunes. It really helps us out. And share it with a friend. What questions would you like answered? Or who would you like to hear from in the carnivore research community? You can find me on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook at CarnivoreCast, or go to carnivorecast.com. You can also email me at info@carnivorecast.com. I'd love to hear from you. Until next time, keep it carnivore.